The HOA's secret, $22 million problem was my road. The morning I locked my private lake road, I figured I'd be arguing with an HOA president. I didn't expect 20 angry homeowners, investors, contractors, and a 911 call that would change everything. Melissa Hartwell swore she owned access to my lake. The problem? My family had owned that road for 40 years, and hidden in my truck was enough paperwork to prove it. Then dispatch heard one name and went quiet. That's when I realized Karen hadn't called the cops on me. She'd called them on herself. If you enjoy stories about land, justice, and standing your ground with facts instead of noise, take a second to subscribe. Now let me tell you how one locked gate exposed a $22 million lie. The first sound I heard that morning was not Melissa Hartwell yelling. It was the scrape of steel against steel. My father's old chain pulled tight through the bars of the gate, heavy enough that it took both hands to wrap it twice around the post. The lock snapped shut at 5:42 a.m., just as the sun started coming over Callaway Lake and turning the water silver behind me. By 6:10, the first SUV came up the gravel road. By 6:20, there were 12. By 6:35, Callaway Lake Road looked like the entrance to a county fair. Pickup trucks, fishing boats, contractors, golf carts, coolers, folding chairs, and a white Mercedes parked sideways at the front, like it had been placed there for a photo shoot. Melissa Hartwell stepped out wearing cream-colored riding boots, a quilted vest, and sunglasses too big for that early in the morning. Her phone was already in her hand. "Everybody keep recording," she called back to the crowd. "This man is illegally blocking community lake access." I stood on my side of the gate with a black coffee in one hand and said nothing. That bothered her more than yelling would have. Melissa walked right up to the chain and grabbed it like she expected it to feel weaker in her hands. It did not move. "This road belongs to Pine Hollow Estates," she said. "You don't get to wake up one morning and hold an entire neighborhood hostage." Behind her, a young couple stood beside a boat trailer, confused. A man in a blue polo held a glossy brochure with my lake printed across the front. 3 contractors stood near a flatbed trailer, not looking at me, not looking at Melissa, not looking anywhere useful. That told me something. Contractors only avoid eye contact when they know they have already been somewhere they should not have been. I looked past Melissa at the orange survey flags stuck along my shoulder ditch. "Planning work today?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "This is an emergency access route," she said, "and you're creating a safety hazard." "Is that what Victor Langford told you?" For half a second, the name landed harder than she expected. Then she recovered and lifted her phone higher. "You hear that?" she said to the crowd and the live stream. "He's threatening the developer now." I took a sip of coffee. "No, ma'am." I asked a question. A few people shifted behind her. Doubt moves quietly at first. One whisper, one glance, one person checking the brochure again. Melissa hated losing the room, so she went louder. "Open the gate, Ethan." "No. You don't have the authority. This is my road." She laughed once, sharp and fake. "Then you won't mind explaining that to the sheriff." She turned toward the crowd like she had just made the winning move. "I'm calling 911. Nobody stopped her. She put the call on speaker. "Bell County Dispatch." Melissa straightened her shoulders. "This is Melissa Hartwell, president of Pine Hollow Estates. I need deputies sent immediately. We have an elderly man illegally blocking community lake access and refusing to open an emergency road." There was a pause. The dispatcher asked, "Location?" Melissa smiled at me while she answered, "Callaway Lake Road." The line went quiet. Not normal quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you somebody on the other end just sat up straighter. Then the dispatcher came back, slower this time. "Callaway Lake Road?" Melissa frowned. Yes, the private road off County 18 leading to Pine Hollow Lake access. Another pause. I looked down at my coffee. That was when I knew something had changed. The dispatcher lowered her voice. Units are already en route. Melissa smiled like that proved everything. But I had worn a badge for 31 years before I retired. I knew tone. I knew hesitation. I knew the sound of a call that had just stopped being routine. Melissa heard help coming. I heard confirmation. Through the cedar trees, sirens started rolling up from the county road. Not fast, not panicked. Steady. Melissa folded her arms and looked back at her crowd, pleased with herself. I rested one hand on my father's chain and waited, because whatever Bell County already knew about Callaway Lake Road, Melissa Hartwell had just forced them to say it out loud. The sirens were getting closer. Melissa kept smiling. I didn't. The thing about waiting is that most people think it's weakness. 31 years in law enforcement taught me the opposite. The person who rushes usually needs something. The person who waits usually already has it. The chain rattled lightly against the gate. 40 years old. Maybe older. I looked down at the rust-dark links wrapped around the steel post and thought about the man who bought them. My father, Wade Callaway. Back when Callaway Lake Road wasn't a road at all. Just a steep stretch of timber, rock, and stubborn ground. The crowd beyond the gate kept talking, but their voices faded into the background. Because the truth was, none of this started with Melissa. It started long before Pine Hollow Estates existed. Long before anybody thought they could sell access to my lake. Back in 1983, my father bought 72 acres nobody wanted. The land sat at the edge of the foothills west of town. No utilities, no maintained roads, no development value, just forest, shoreline, and a small lake tucked between two ridges. Everyone told him he was wasting his money. He bought it anyway. Then he spent the next 2 years building what nobody else would. He brought in an old bulldozer. He cut the road himself, every ditch, every drainage pipe, every truckload of gravel. When the county refused maintenance responsibility, he paid for maintenance himself. When spring runoff washed sections away, he rebuilt them, and every single receipt went into a box. My father trusted paperwork more than promises. As it turned out, he was right. A truck door slammed somewhere behind Melissa. The sound pulled me back. One of the contractors was pacing now. Nervous. Interesting. People get nervous when they know something is about to be verified. I took another sip of coffee. The taste reminded me of mornings with Claire. That road had become part of our life long after my father built it. When Claire got sick, the lake became her favorite place. Not because it was beautiful, because it was quiet. Every morning during those last months, I'd drive her slowly down Callaway Road, windows down, coffee in her lap, lake on our right, mountains on our left. Some mornings she barely spoke. She'd just watch the water. Toward the end, she started asking me to stop at the same turnout halfway down the road. We'd sit there for 10 minutes before sunrise. No talking, just listening. One morning she squeezed my hand and said something I never forgot. Promise me nobody ever turns this place into a business. At the time, I laughed. Who would want to? Now I knew. An entire subdivision, apparently. A movement near the front of the crowd caught my eye. A man in his 30s stepped forward holding one of Pine Hollow's glossy brochures. He looked confused. Then he looked at Melissa. Is this actually private property? Melissa didn't answer immediately. Bad sign. People who know the truth answer quickly. People protecting a story need time. This community was promised lake access, she said. That wasn't an answer. The man noticed. So did several others. I watched doubt spread through the crowd. Slowly. Dangerously. Melissa saw it too. Her voice got louder. The HOA has documentation. That got my attention. Documentation. Interesting choice of word. Because 3 months earlier, I'd found something while cleaning out my father's workshop. An old filing cabinet. Bottom drawer. Locked. Inside was a weathered manila folder. Across the front, written in black marker, were 4 words. Never lose these. My father's handwriting. I hadn't thought much about it at first, until I opened it. Inside were decades of records, original surveys, property maps, road maintenance receipts, correspondence with the county, tax records, permit applications, everything. Page after page proving exactly who built Callaway Lake Road, exactly who maintained it, exactly who owned it. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table late into the night reading those documents and realizing something. My father hadn't preserved them because he expected trouble. He preserved them because he knew trouble eventually arrives when something valuable stays in one family long enough. The sirens were close now, very close. Melissa straightened her shoulders. The crowd turned toward the road. So did I. But my attention wasn't on the approaching vehicles. It was on the folder sitting in the passenger seat of my truck. The same folder my father had labeled. The same folder containing documents nobody in Pine Hollow knew existed. And suddenly I found myself wondering whether that strange pause from dispatch had anything to do with what was inside. Because if somebody at Bell County had already started looking at those records, then Melissa Hartwell might have just called help for the wrong side. And if that was true, the people arriving weren't coming to open my gate. They were coming to find out why Pine Hollow Estates believed they owned a road that never belonged to them. The answer started almost 2 years earlier. Back then, Pine Hollow Estates was nothing more than a construction site on the ridge above Callaway Lake. Excavators, concrete trucks, survey crews, a steady stream of money rolling into land that had been cattle pasture for generations. I didn't pay much attention at first. Development happens. People move in. Land changes. That's life. Then one afternoon, a glossy brochure showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Just a photograph on the front. My dock. My shoreline. My lake. Across the top, in gold letters. Private lake living. Exclusive water access. I remember staring at it for a long time, not because I was angry, because I was confused. There was only one problem with those promises. Nobody had ever asked permission. A week later, I got my answer. A white SUV came up my driveway and stopped beside my barn. The woman who stepped out introduced herself before I could ask. Melissa Hartwell, Pine Hollow Estates, HOA. She carried a leather folder and the kind of confidence people get when they've spent too much time hearing yes. I'd love to discuss a partnership opportunity. That phrase alone told me she wasn't there to negotiate. People who want permission ask directly. People who want leverage use business language. Melissa spread several brochures across my porch table. Families fishing, kayaks on the water, children running beside docks. Every image carefully chosen. Every image designed to sell a dream. The problem was that half the photographs had been taken on my property. I tapped one picture. My dock. Melissa smiled. Our residents are very excited about the lake. Then they should buy one. The smile tightened, only slightly. We're building a community. Congratulations. She tried again. We believe shared access would benefit everyone. There it was. Not a request. An assumption. I leaned back in my chair. Access to what? The lake. The lake belongs to me. Her smile vanished for the first time. Only for a second. Then it returned. Smaller. Colder. Development changes things, Mr. Calloway. I remember looking at her for several seconds. Then I asked a simple question. Did somebody already sell access? That landed harder than I expected. Melissa immediately started gathering her papers. Too quickly. Too carefully. The conversation ended less than 2 minutes later. But as she walked back to her SUV, she stopped and looked at the road. Not the lake, not the dock. The road. That was the first clue. At the time, I didn't understand it. A month later, the second clue arrived. A family appeared on my shoreline carrying fishing rods and folding chairs. The father waved when he saw me, friendly, relaxed, completely unaware that he was trespassing. Beautiful place, he said. I nodded. What brings you down here? He looked surprised by the question. The HOA lake. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked where he'd heard that. He pointed toward Pine Hollow. They told us every homeowner gets access, not ownership. Access. The exact word Melissa had used. That family packed up immediately after I explained the situation. They weren't the problem. The problem was what happened next. Because the next weekend, there were 2 families, then 5, then golf carts, then picnic coolers, then boats. Each group honestly believed the same thing, that Calloway Lake belonged to Pine Hollow Estates. Someone had sold them a fantasy. And the more money people spent buying that fantasy, the harder it became for anyone inside Pine Hollow to admit the truth. One evening, my neighbor Frank Dalton stopped by. Frank had lived on the next ranch over for nearly 30 years. He climbed out of his truck holding one of the brochures. Seen this? I nodded. Frank flipped it open. There, printed beside a photograph of my shoreline, was a sentence that made my stomach tighten. Private community waterfront recreation. Guaranteed. Not proposed. Not pending. Guaranteed. Frank whistled softly. That's a dangerous word. Yep. You gonna do something about it? I looked toward the ridge where Pine Hollow sat. Lights in every window. New homes. New buyers. New promises. No, I said. Not yet. Because by then I had started realizing something. People don't build an entire marketing campaign around a lie unless they're protecting something valuable. The question wasn't whether Melissa Hartwell was lying. The question was why. And the answer was buried somewhere behind those brochures, those promises, and that road she couldn't stop looking at. I just didn't know it yet. But I was about to find out exactly how much Pine Hollow Estates stood to lose if Calloway Lake Road stayed private. The next morning, I drove into town with the brochure on the passenger seat and my father's folder beside it. Bell County Records sat behind the courthouse in a low brick building that looked too small to hold that much truth. Helen Price was behind the counter. She had been county recorder for 26 years and had the kind of memory that made computers look lazy. She looked over her glasses when I walked in. "Ethan Calloway," she said, "you only come here when somebody's lying." I set the brochure down. Then I'm in the right place. She looked at the cover. Her expression changed before she said a word. "That's your dock. That's my dock." She opened the brochure slowly. On page 3, Pine Hollow Estates promised lake access, private boating privileges, shoreline recreation, and future emergency access improvements. Helen read that last phrase twice. Then she looked at me. Emergency access improvements? That caught your eye too. She walked to the back room and came out with 3 folders. Recorded plats, easement index, subdivision filings. No drama, no speech. Just paper. That's how real truth enters a room. Quiet. Helen started with Pine Hollow's original plat. The subdivision boundary ran along the ridge. It stopped 200 yards above my fence line. Then she pulled the easement index. No lake access easement. No road easement. No shoreline right-of-way. No recreational use agreement. Nothing connecting Pine Hollow Estates to Callaway Lake or Callaway Road. Helen tapped the page. They've got access to their own streets, their drainage easement, their utility corridor, and the clubhouse parcel. That's it. What about the lake? She turned the plat toward me. The lake is fully inside your parcel. The road? She flipped to another page. Private road. Recorded under Wade Callaway. Transferred to Ethan Callaway after probate. Maintained privately. Taxed privately. She looked up. No county dedication. No public acceptance. I already knew most of that. But hearing it from Helen made it different. Official. Clean. Final. Then she pulled the brochure closer and frowned at the fine print. At the bottom of one page was a small map. Pine Hollow Phase 1 in gray. A future expansion shaded in gold. A thin red line ran from that gold section straight down my road. Helen went still. Where did they get this map? I was hoping you could tell me. She left again. This time she was gone longer. When she returned, she carried a planning file with a yellow tab. Pine Hollow Estates Preliminary Expansion Concept, filed by Victor Langford. She spread the pages across the counter. The same red line appeared again, not labeled as private, not labeled as proposed. Labeled Secondary Emergency Route. I felt the room narrow. That's Callaway Road. Helen nodded. They drew it like they had rights to it. Did they file anything proving they do? She checked the folder, then checked again. No. That single word changed everything. Because now it wasn't just misleading homeowners. It wasn't just brochures. It wasn't just Melissa pushing too hard. Someone had submitted planning documents to Bell County showing my private road as part of Pine Hollow's future infrastructure. Helen pulled one more sheet from the file. A glossy site plan. At the bottom, in small print, was the developer's name. Victor Langford. Beside it was Melissa Hartwell's signature as HOA representative. Helen stared at the signature, then at me. Ethan, this is not HOA confusion. I folded the brochure and slid it back into the folder. What is it? She lowered her voice. It's a paper trail. I knew that tone. I'd heard it from clerks, deputies, judges, and witnesses who suddenly realized something minor had become something bigger. Helen made copies of everything. Certified copies. Stamped, dated, sealed. I paid the fee and watched her slide them across the counter. Be careful, she said. Why? Because people don't fake certainty unless they're scared of the truth. I left with the documents under my arm. Outside, the town was waking up. Traffic, coffee shop doors, a courthouse bell, normal life. But the paper in my hand had shifted the whole fight. Pine Hollow Estates had no lake rights, no road rights, no shoreline rights, and yet Melissa Hartwell had signed paperwork pretending they did. As I started my truck, I looked back at the brochure on the seat. Families smiling beside water that was not theirs. Promises printed over land they did not own. And that red line running straight through my father's road. That was when I understood the real question was no longer whether Pine Hollow was lying. The question was what would happen to them if the county found out. I got my answer sooner than I expected. Because the week after my visit to Helen Price, Pine Hollow stopped pretending this was about community access. They started applying pressure. The first sign appeared beside Callaway Road on a Monday morning. white post, blue lettering. Pine Hollow Lake Access, resident entrance. It stood 6 feet inside my property line. I pulled it out myself. By Wednesday, there were 2 more. By Friday, there were 4. Every one of them documented before I removed them. Photographs, GPS coordinates, timestamps. 31 years in law enforcement teaches you something important. Never argue with evidence. Collect it. The following weekend, homeowners started arriving with printed HOA newsletters. Several carried identical maps. Maps showing Callaway Lake shaded inside Pine Hollow Estates. Maps showing my road as a community route. Maps that had never existed in any county office. Someone was manufacturing certainty, and people were believing it. One Saturday afternoon, a retired couple parked near my dock while carrying folding chairs and a picnic basket. The husband looked embarrassed before I even said a word. We got a notice from the HOA. I held out my hand. He gave me the paper. The headline read, Expanded Resident Water Access Program. Below that was Melissa Hartwell's signature. I folded the paper and handed it back. This isn't legal. The man sighed. I was starting to wonder. That sentence stayed with me, because more residents were starting to wonder, and Melissa seemed determined to stop them from asking questions. The drones started 3 days later. Small black quadcopters, commercial models, not toys. The first one appeared above my dock just after sunrise. The second hovered near the shoreline the next afternoon. The third flew low over my equipment shed, close enough that I could see the camera lens turning. Watching, recording, surveying. I took photographs of every flight, filed dates, filed times, built a folder. The folder was getting thick. That same week, Frank Dalton showed up unannounced. His truck stopped beside my barn just before dusk. He climbed out, looking uneasy. That got my attention. Frank wasn't a nervous man. Something wrong? I asked. He nodded toward the road. You've had visitors. What kind? Contractors. I waited. Frank pointed toward the ridge. 3 nights this week. My stomach tightened. Doing what? Measuring. That single word carried weight. People measure things they intend to use, or buy, or take. What exactly were they measuring? The road. Now we were getting somewhere. Frank crossed his arms. I watched them from my south pasture. How long? Couple hours. Did they see you? No. Good. Frank reached into his truck and handed me something. A photograph. Printed. Taken with a zoom lens. 3 men standing beside Callaway Road. Survey equipment. Orange flags. Reflective vests. One of them holding a clipboard. The logo on the truck door was visible. Langford Development Group. Victor Langford's company. I studied the picture, then looked up. Can I keep this? Frank nodded. Already made copies. Of course he had. That's why we'd been neighbors for 20 years. Frank understood documentation. I added the photo to the folder. Then another piece of the puzzle slid into place. The brochures, the maps, the drones, the survey crews, the fake access claims. All of it pointed toward the same thing. Planning. Not recreation, not fishing. Planning. Somebody was preparing for something. The question was what? 2 days later, Melissa answered it without realizing she had. I was loading feed bags into my truck when her SUV stopped at the gate. She got out carrying a clipboard. No greeting, no smile, just business. We need to discuss access. Interesting. Not request. Need. I leaned against the truck. Access to what? The road. There it was again. Not the lake. Not the shoreline. The road. Melissa caught herself immediately. Too late. I had already noticed. She straightened the papers in her hand. The community has expectations. I looked at the county-certified documents sitting on my passenger seat. No, Melissa, I said it calmly. The community has assumptions. For the first time since I met her, I saw genuine irritation break through. She turned and walked back to her SUV without another word. No threats. No speeches. No live stream. Just frustration. Which worried me more. Because people stop talking when talking stops working. And something told me Melissa Hartwell was already looking for another wass around Callaway Road. The only question was how far she was willing to go. I got the answer on Memorial Day weekend. The lake was busy before sunrise. Not unusual. What was unusual was how many vehicles were coming from Pine Hollow. Golf carts, side-by-sides, pickup trucks, more than I'd ever seen. I counted nearly 30 people heading toward the shoreline before 8 in the morning. Families, coolers, portable grills, fishing gear. Nobody asked permission. Nobody knocked on my door. They moved with the confidence of people who believed somebody had already granted them access. That somebody was Melissa. I found her near the dock, talking to residents like a tour guide. She was pointing at the lake while holding one of those same glossy brochures. When she saw me approaching, she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she thought she had numbers on her side. Beautiful day for the community, she said. This isn't community property. Several residents looked uncomfortable. Melissa ignored them. The homeowners disagree. I looked around. Most of the people standing there weren't angry. They were confused. That mattered, because confused people can still change their minds. Melissa needed them convinced. I needed them informed. Before I could answer, a boy ran past carrying a football. His foot landed directly in a flower bed beside the shoreline path. My stomach tightened, not because of the flowers, because of where they were. Claire's Memorial Garden. I turned immediately. 3 lawn chairs had already been placed near the stone marker. A cooler sat beside it. Someone had pushed a folding table halfway into the flower bed. The bluebells Claire loved were flattened beneath chair legs. For a moment, I just stood there, silent. The sounds around me faded. People laughing, boats launching, music. All of it seemed distant. The memorial stone remained visible. Claire Callaway. Her name, the dates, the inscription beneath. She loved the quiet. A disposable cup sat leaning against it. I picked it up slowly. Then another. Then a crushed soda can. When I turned around, Melissa was watching, still smiling. That was the moment something changed. Not anger, something colder. Clarity. This was no longer about property boundaries. It was no longer about brochures, or maps, or fake access claims. Claire had spent her final months beside that lake. Every flower in that garden had been planted by hand, every stone placed deliberately, and now strangers were treating it like overflow parking. I walked back toward Melissa. The crowd quieted. Maybe they saw something in my face. Maybe they finally understood there was more at stake than fishing access. I stopped a few feet from her. Move them. Her smile faltered. What? The chairs? The tables? The people? This is a community gathering. No. I pointed toward the memorial. That's my wife's grave marker. Silence. Not complete silence, but enough. Several residents turned immediately. A woman standing near the shoreline covered her mouth. An older man stepped back from the flower bed. Someone quietly folded a chair. Melissa looked toward the memorial for the first time all morning. Then she made a mistake. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. We were told this area was open access. There it was. Not sympathy. Not responsibility. An excuse. I looked directly at her. You were told by who? She didn't answer. Because she knew. The answer was herself. Within 15 minutes, most of the residents had packed up. Not because I forced them. Because the truth had finally reached them. One family apologized before leaving. Another asked if the brochures were accurate. A third wanted to know who actually owned the shoreline. Questions. Exactly the thing Melissa had been trying to avoid. By noon, the crowd was gone. The memorial garden wasn't. Flattened flowers, damaged plants, mud across the stone. Nothing irreversible. But enough. I spent the rest of the afternoon restoring what I could. Replacing borders. Replanting stems. Cleaning Claire's marker. Halfway through, Frank Dalton's truck pulled into the driveway. He stepped out carrying a camera. You're going to want to see this. I followed him to the tailgate. The photographs showed contractors working beside Callaway Road after midnight. Not surveying. Digging. Marking. Measuring distances from the road edge to the subdivision boundary. One photo showed temporary stakes. Another showed paint markings. A third showed equipment belonging to Langford Development Group. This wasn't preparation for lake access. It was preparation for construction. I stared at the images, then at the damaged memorial garden behind me, then at the road beyond the trees. For weeks, I'd been asking the wrong question. Why did they want access? That wasn't it. The lake was bait. The road was the target. And if contractors were working after midnight, they were operating on a schedule, a deadline, a pressure I still couldn't see. But I was getting close. Close enough that Melissa had stopped pretending. Close enough that somebody was willing to push farther than before. And standing beside Claire's memorial, holding photographs of contractors measuring my road in the dark, I realized something. Whatever Pine Hollow was hiding had to be worth a lot more than a few boat launches and fishing trips. The next morning, I stopped guessing. I started digging. The first call I made was to Helen Price. The second was to a man named Carl Bennett. Carl worked in the county planning department. Before that, he'd spent 20 years reviewing development permits across western Colorado. If there was a problem buried inside a subdivision application, Carl usually found it. We met in his office that afternoon. I laid Frank's photographs on his desk. Contractors, survey equipment, road measurements, midnight work. Carl studied them for nearly a minute. Then he asked a question. Why are they measuring the road? That's what I'm trying to find out. He leaned back. No. He tapped one of the photos. They're not measuring the road. He pointed at the shoulder. Then the ditch. Then the fence line. They're measuring width. That got my attention. Carl turned toward his computer and pulled up Pine Hollow's planning file. Several maps appeared. Most I'd never seen before. Site plans, drainage plans, traffic studies, emergency access diagrams. Then he opened something labeled Phase 2 Expansion Review. The room got very quiet. Carl stared at the screen. Then he looked at me. You know about this? No. You're going to want to. He printed 3 pages, spread them across his desk, and suddenly everything started making sense. Phase 2 included 38 additional homes, a clubhouse, boat storage, rental slips, event space, expanded parking. Estimated value, $22.4 million. I looked at the number twice, then a third time. Carl pointed lower on the page. Keep reading. I did. Halfway down the report was a highlighted condition. Secondary emergency access required prior to final approval. I followed the red line on the map. Straight downhill, straight across my property, straight onto Callaway Road. I looked up. They need my road. Carl nodded. Without it, they fail emergency access review. Can they build anyway? No. Can they sell Phase 2 lots? No. Can they get occupancy approval? Carl shook his head. No. The answer hit harder than I expected, because suddenly the entire fight changed shape. Melissa didn't want lake access. Victor Langford didn't want lake access. The brochures weren't about fishing. The newsletters weren't about recreation. The HOA wasn't chasing shoreline privileges. They were chasing a road. My road. Because without Callaway Road, $22 million disappeared. Carl kept scrolling. Then he frowned. I knew that look. What? He opened another document. Pre-sale marketing packages, reservation agreements, deposit disclosures. There were dozens, maybe more. Carl looked at me. That's not good. What's not good? They've already started selling it. I felt my stomach tighten. Before approval? Looks that way. He pointed at the paperwork. Future homeowners had already placed deposits. Investors had already committed funds. Marketing campaigns were already running. The development was acting as though approval was guaranteed, as though access already existed, as though Callaway Road already belonged to them. I sat back slowly. Now I understood the pressure. The brochures, the drones, the survey crews, the fake maps. Every step had been leading here. They weren't trying to gain access. They were trying to protect an assumption, and that assumption was worth millions. Carl folded his arms. You got problems? I looked at the maps. No. I pointed at the red line crossing my property. They do. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift. Not publicly, not visibly, but underneath everything. Because truth had finally exposed motive. And motive explains behavior. People trespass for convenience. They commit to a lie for profit. $22 million explained every decision Melissa Hartwell had made since the day she stepped onto my porch. Every promise, every brochure, every confrontation. She wasn't defending a neighborhood. She was protecting a financial structure built on property she never owned. Carl slid copies of the documents across the desk. Take these. I gathered the papers carefully. Planning maps, emergency access requirements, expansion filings. Evidence, real evidence, the kind that survives courtrooms, the kind that changes investigations. As I stood to leave, Carl stopped me. One more thing. I turned back. If they're this deep into Phase 2, they're under pressure. What kind of pressure? He looked toward the map, the kind that makes people take risks. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about that. Because Carl was right. A normal developer would negotiate. A normal HOA would back down. A normal person would admit the mistake. But nothing about Pine Hollow had been normal. Not the fake maps, not the brochures, not the midnight survey crews. And if $22 million was hanging over Callaway Road, then Melissa Hartwell wasn't going to walk away. She was going to get desperate. The only question left was what desperation looked like. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait very long to find out. The first camera disappeared on a Thursday. Not stolen. Destroyed. I found it hanging from its mount, beside the lower fence line. The lens had been smashed. The housing cracked. The memory card missing. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. That mattered. Random vandals damage property. People under pressure destroy evidence. I photographed everything before taking it down. Boot prints remained in the dirt. Heavy tread. Work boots. Not hiking boots. Not running shoes. Contractors. The second camera lasted 2 days. The third survived less than 24 hours. By then, the message was obvious. Someone knew they were being watched, and they didn't like it. What they didn't know was that the cameras they found weren't the important ones. Those were visible, deliberately visible. I wanted them noticed. The real cameras were somewhere else. 3 trail cameras, 2 motion-activated units, 1 thermal camera overlooking the gate. All hidden, all recording, all feeding into a system nobody outside my property knew existed. 31 years in law enforcement teaches you something. If somebody keeps attacking the bait, don't move the bait. Watch the trap. 3 nights later, Deputy Mason Reed stopped by. He leaned against the hood of his patrol vehicle while I showed him copies of the planning documents, the Phase 2 maps, the emergency access requirement, the red line crossing Callaway Road. Mason studied them quietly. Then he looked up. 22 million? That's the estimate. He whistled softly. No wonder they're acting crazy. I handed him a flash drive. What is this, insurance? Mason frowned. Meaning, if something happens, I want somebody besides me holding copies. He understood immediately. The flash drive disappeared into his pocket. No promises, no speeches, just a nod. Good enough. That same evening, I drove down to the gate, the one my father built decades earlier. Steel frame, concrete footings, heavy hinges, solid. I examined every post carefully. Then I loosened one section. Not enough to weaken it, just enough to look neglected. To somebody in a hurry, it would appear vulnerable. That was important, because desperate people don't attack strong targets. They attack weak-looking ones. Then I waited. Friday passed. Nothing. Saturday passed. Nothing. Sunday night changed everything. At 12:41 a.m., my phone vibrated. Motion alert. Gate camera. I was already awake. Within seconds, I had the live feed open. Headlights. 4 vehicles. 1 pickup. 2 contractor trucks. 1 SUV. They stopped 100 yards short of the gate and killed their lights. Interesting. People rarely hide when they believe they're doing something legal. 6 figures stepped out. Thermal imaging made identification easy. One person stood out immediately. Melissa Hartwell. Even from a distance, I recognized the way she moved. Fast, sharp, confident. The others carried tools, bolt cutters, shovels, equipment cases. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody looked comfortable, because they knew exactly what they were doing. I watched from my living room as they approached the gate. One contractor tested the chain. Another examined the post. Melissa pointed toward the concrete footing. Then the excavator rolled forward. That got my attention. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed everything. This wasn't about crossing the road. They intended to remove the obstacle. The machine lowered its bucket. Steel touched concrete. One contractor laughed. Old man's finally out of options. Another shook his head. She said we'd have access by Monday. Melissa stepped closer. Just get it done. The audio captured every word. Clear. Perfect. No interpretation required. No assumptions. Evidence, real evidence. The excavator pushed against the gate support. Concrete cracked. Metal groaned. The structure shifted several inches. Property damage. Trespass. Conspiracy. Multiple crimes. Recorded from 6 different angles. Then something unexpected happened. One contractor hesitated. He looked toward Melissa. What if he files another complaint? Melissa didn't even pause. He won't matter after approval. That sentence changed everything. Because now motive was on camera too. Not recreation. Not community access. Approval. The road. The development. $22 million. The entire reason for this fight. The contractor nodded reluctantly. Work resumed. For nearly 20 minutes, they damaged property they had no right to touch. Then they left, convinced nobody had seen a thing. The vehicles disappeared into the darkness. The road fell quiet again. I sat there watching the final camera feed replay. Melissa's face, the contractors, the excavator, the admissions, the property damage, everything. By sunrise, I had copies saved in 3 locations. One for me, one for Mason, one sealed inside a package addressed to Bell County investigators. Then I drove to my father's barn. The same barn where Wade Calloway kept equipment for decades. The bulldozer was still there, dusty, silent, waiting, and hanging beside it was the old chain. Heavy steel, weathered, unbreakable. I wrapped it through the gate before dawn, twice, locked it tight, then tightened it again. By the time the sun came up, Calloway Road was officially closed. Not because I was angry, because I finally had enough evidence. And something told me Melissa Hartwell was about to make one last mistake. The kind of mistake people make when they believe they're still in control. That mistake arrived at 6:10 the next morning, exactly where this story began. Calloway Road, the locked gate, my father's chain. By then, word had spread through Pine Hollow Estates. Dozens of residents showed up. So did contractors. So did prospective buyers. A shuttle van sat near the front of the line carrying people interested in Phase 2 lots. That detail mattered, because Melissa wasn't just trying to open the road. She was trying to prove she could. Publicly. In front of investors. In front of buyers. In front of everyone who had already paid money, believing her promises. I stood beside the gate holding a cup of coffee. The evidence package was already gone. Delivered before sunrise. Video footage. Planning documents. Photographs. Certified records. Every piece of the puzzle. Melissa didn't know that. She climbed out of her SUV looking confident. Too confident. The kind of confidence people wear when they think reality is negotiable. Her phone was already recording. Live stream again. Audience again. Performance again. You cannot legally block this access point. I took a sip of coffee. Actually, I can. She pointed toward the chain. You're interfering with community infrastructure. That phrase almost made me smile. Community infrastructure. A private road her organization didn't own. A road her own documents never legally controlled. A road her contractors had damaged less than 8 hours earlier. The crowd was listening carefully now. Questions had been building for weeks, and Melissa knew it. A homeowner near the front raised his hand. Melissa, do we actually have lake rights? Her jaw tightened. Of course we do. Another voice. Then why is the county map different? That one landed harder. Melissa ignored it. Bad move. Ignoring questions only creates more of them. Then she reached for her phone. I'll settle this right now. She hit speaker. Several people stepped closer. I recognized the call immediately. Again. Bell County Dispatch answered. Melissa straightened her shoulders. This is Melissa Hartwell, president of Pine Hollow Estates. I need deputies immediately. We have an individual illegally blocking emergency access. The dispatcher asked for the location. Everyone waited. Melissa answered confidently. Callaway Lake Road. Silence. The exact same silence from Chapter 1. Only this time it lasted longer. Then the dispatcher spoke. Units are already en route. Melissa smiled. Wrong reaction. Because I knew what those words meant, and I suspected dispatch knew exactly who had submitted the evidence package. A minute later, the sirens appeared. Then another. Then another. Too many. Far too many. The first vehicle belonged to the sheriff's office. The second, too. Behind them came county vehicles. Then an unmarked SUV. Then another. The crowd started whispering. Melissa stopped smiling. Sheriff Luke Garner stepped out first. We'd worked together for years before my retirement. He nodded at me once, then turned toward Melissa. No smile, no greeting, nothing. That got everyone's attention. Behind him came two county investigators carrying folders. One of them looked familiar. Planning Department. The other carried a sealed evidence case. Now Melissa looked worried. Good. The lead investigator stepped forward. Melissa Hartwell? Yes. We need to discuss several matters regarding Pine Hollow Estates. She lifted her phone. This man is illegally... The investigator cut her off. No, ma'am. Those two words changed everything. The crowd went completely silent. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of the planning maps, the Phase 2 documents, the emergency access requirements, the certified records from Helen Price. Then came the photographs, the damaged gate, the midnight excavation, the survey crews, the hidden camera footage. Every screen grab dated and time-stamped. The investigator held one photograph up. Melissa standing beside the excavator. Clear as day. A homeowner near the front gasped. Another stepped backward. The investigator continued. Our office has received evidence indicating unauthorized entry onto private property, false access representations, and development filings relying on infrastructure not owned by Pine Hollow Estates. The words hit the crowd like a shockwave. Questions erupted immediately. What does that mean? Did we buy into something illegal? What about our lake access? Melissa tried to answer. Nobody listened, because for the first time, official documents were speaking louder than she was. Then Sheriff Garner did something simple. He held up a county plat map. Callaway Lake belongs to Ethan Callaway. Another map. Callaway Road belongs to Ethan Callaway. Another. No public easement exists. Simple, direct, undeniable. Years of marketing collapsed in less than 60 seconds. Then came the final blow. The investigator opened the last folder. Phase 2. The red emergency access line. The $22 million expansion. The room changed instantly. Homeowners realized they had been misled. Investors realized they had been exposed. Buyers realized they had been sold promises dependent on land the developer never controlled. Melissa looked around desperately, searching for support. There wasn't any, because the truth had finally arrived. And unlike a brochure, it came with signatures. The investigator closed the folder. Sheriff Garner folded his arms, and standing there beside my father's chain, I finally understood why the dispatcher had paused when Melissa called. Bell County wasn't responding to her complaint. Bell County had been waiting for her to make it. Melissa Hartwell stopped talking after that. Not because she wanted to, because there was nothing left that sounded convincing. The live stream was still running in her hand, pointed mostly at the gravel now. You could hear homeowners demanding answers behind her. You could hear contractors telling investigators they were only following instructions. You could hear one prospective buyer ask Victor Langford why his sales packet showed access through private land. Victor did not answer. He tried to leave instead. Sheriff Luke Garner stepped into his path. "Mr. Langford, county investigators need a statement." Victor looked toward Melissa. That was his second mistake. The first had been building $22 million of promises on my road. Within an hour, the crowd was gone. The contractors stayed. So did Victor. So did Melissa. The gate never opened. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever for Pine Hollow. 3 weeks later, the county froze Phase 2. No secondary emergency access. No final approval. No occupancy permits. No clubhouse, no boat storage, no event space. $22 million of future sales stopped at the end of a locked road. Homeowners began receiving letters from attorneys. Not from the HOA, from their own lawyers. The first lawsuit came from 6 families who had paid premiums for lake access that did not exist. Then came 14 more. Then investors. Then a contractor who said Langford Development Group had ordered work based on representations that Pine Hollow controlled Callaway Road. By fall, the HOA board was gone. Melissa resigned first, then tried to claim she had been misled by Victor. That lasted until Nancy Cooper turned witness. Nancy was the only board member who had kept copies of early meeting notes. Emails, access discussions, warnings from one title company, a message from Melissa that said, in writing, "If we act like access is settled, residents will stop questioning it." That sentence hurt her more than any speech I could have given. Deputy Mason Reed later told me the case had grown beyond trespass. False advertising, fraudulent development representations, property damage, illegal entry, the kind of charges that begin with paper and end in courtrooms. Melissa was not dragged away screaming. Real justice rarely looks that theatrical. She stood in front of a judge in a dark blazer, quiet for once, while the county laid out dates, documents, footage, and signatures. No shouting, no live stream, just evidence. Victor Langford's company settled first. The number was sealed, but Frank Dalton heard from a banker that it was enough to make 3 investors disappear from Colorado before winter. Pine Hollow survived, but smaller, quieter. The homes on the ridge still stood, but the brochures vanished. The lake photographs disappeared from every website. The phrase, "exclusive water access," was removed like it had never existed. But I remembered. So did the people who had paid for it. In October, I repaired the gate. New hinge plates, new steel post, fresh concrete. I kept my father's chain, rust and all. Some things don't need to look pretty to do their job. Then I made a new sign for the entrance. Black steel, white letters. Callaway Lake Road. Private property. Exception. I welded it myself in Wade Callaway's old barn, the same barn where the bulldozer still sat under dust. After I bolted the sign into place, I walked down to Claire's memorial. The bluebells had come back. Not all of them. Enough. I cleaned the stone again, though it was already clean. Habit, maybe, or apology. I sat beside it for a while as the lake moved softly against the dock posts below. No boats, no golf carts, no drones, no voices carrying down from the ridge. Just the wind, just water, just the kind of quiet Claire used to call honest. People later asked if I felt like I had won. I never knew how to answer that. Winning sounds too loud for what happened. What I felt was simpler. The line held, the papers held, the truth held. And in the end, that was enough. I looked back toward the gate, toward the road my father carved through rock and timber 40 years earlier. Still locked, still private, still ours. Wade Calloway built that road with steel, gravel, and stubborn hands. Claire gave that lake its meaning. Melissa Hartwell tried to turn both into a sales pitch. But some things cannot be converted into amenities. Some things belong to memory. Some things belong to family. And some roads stay closed because opening them would let the lie win. So I left the chain where it was. Heavy, ugly, honest, doing exactly what my father built it to do.
If there's one lesson I took from all of this, is that the things worth protecting are usually protected long before trouble ever shows up. My father kept because nobody thought we need. Claire treasured a quiet stretch of lake that most people would have driven right past. At the time, those choices didn't seem important. Years later, they turned out to matter more than anyone realized. The truth is patience, reparations, and honesty don't always feel powerful in the moment. But when questions finally get asked, they're often the thing that stand the longest. I also think this story is a reminder that dignity isn't about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it's about staying steady, knowing what belongs to you, and letting the facts speak when the time comes. Land, memories, family history, and promises made to the people we love. Those things deserve care. Not because they're expensive, but because they're meaningful. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground over something important, even when it felt like nobody else understood why it mattered? If so, type yes in the comments, or just drop a word honest if you believe truth still matters more than noise. And if you enjoy a story about ordinary people facing difficult situations with patience, determination, and common sense, consider subscribing. We got plenty more HOA, rent plans, and property price story ahead, and we'll be glad to have you along for the journey.